live? We're live. Welcome to the office hours. Oh my God. The office hours of the eLearn community at Open LMS. How are you today, Chris?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Awesome. Do you have a fish eye lens on your camera?
Kind of. It's not really. No, the fisheye lens is kind of worse because it makes my face like a fishbowl. This one is just like it expands the sort of the angle.
Yeah.
But
I can just see it's got a round.
Yeah, because the corners of the lens are still within the camera. But sometimes it doesn't show. I have no idea. I don't know what I'm doing.
Does anybody really know what they're doing, Chris? That's one thing. It's a question that I've pondered a lot lately. Does anybody actually really know what they're doing?
Well, if that's the case, and I hope it is the case, because we are like explicitly not knowing what we're doing.
Yes.
So it works better for us if everyone is like this, and we are sort of the pioneers in admitting that.
Fantastic.
We are not.
All right. So let's, before, we're going to, I think we should have two parts today. One, we want to kind of recap the instructor session of the eLearn Success Series.
Yeah.
Let's do a real quick recap just so that everybody knows what's out there, what happened. And then let's get serious. So we've got, 8 weeks, 9 weeks until the next session. So I feel like we need to make some serious progress in building this course over the next 9 weeks. Like we need to show up with something to talk about at the EdTech session on July 20th. For those of you who are not familiar, we run something called the eLearn Success Series. And the eLearn Success Series is a free series of e-learning events. We had the design session, and now we've actually had the instructor session. And now we're going to get ready for the EdTech session. And the EdTech session has already got some pretty heavy hitters in it. So pretty excited about that too. What was your take from the instructor section?
Well, before that, I just want to say that maybe we could like kill two birds with one stone, and we can check sort of the sessions that we had last week and see what of each session we can plug into our course. I think that would be interesting.
Okay. All right. That would be interesting. All right. Do you want to pull up a list of the sessions, or I'm going to make sure we don't forget anyone.
Yeah, I think I have them right here, but not a lot.
Oh, look at that. It's a map. So Nick Furman, who, he celebrated Teacher Moments in a Time of Change. I'm going to say he won the gold prize in terms of presenters for this one right out of the gate. He had a turtle, he had a salamander, he had a snake, and he just had great energy, right? He kind of came with great points. And his overall message was recognizing how to be a better teacher. And I think this is one of the questions you and I need to answer in the course that we're creating is how will it work? Because if it's a fully automated experience, like a self-paced course, then I'm wondering how we implant or integrate, some of these themes that Nick put on the table.
And I honestly don't see a way we can get the level that he got on a self-paced course.
Well, right, but that's what I'm saying. Like, but we've also said, does this have to be a self-paced course, or how innovative could we be about how this course works, right?
Yeah.
Or is it just, it's a self-paced course, but then there's clear cohort opportunities to interact and, I guess interact is the word to participate, right? Interact and participate, right? So there's clear, like, all right, look, here's, you have these, between weeks 1 and 6, you have the opportunity to kind of muddle through the things that we put on the table. But then in week 7, here's the cohort opportunity to come together, do some peer activities, to do some feedback and presentation,
Yeah, but you know, I mean, the lesson that I came out of that is that connection is really important, but it's just the perfect moment is when these moments of connection are transcendent in a way. So, and I just love the way he weave those actual lessons with his description of how each animal behaves. And it was also really interesting how he did this really great setup before each animal, which was a way for us to say, oh, what's going to happen? What kind of animal is it? And then he was sort of setting up the mood for the animal, you know. He would put like something soft for the snake, and he would wet his hands, so he was easier for the salamander to get a grasp of his hands. So my question is, how do you make connections that are transcendent? And I said because, yeah, the reality is that there's tons of networking, virtual events, that kind of experience already. So I think maybe we should think of what's above that, what's above connection.
Okay.
And that's why the word transcendence comes to me. And it was definitely really groundbreaking what Nick did.
I don't know if it was groundbreaking as much as it was just an example of excellence. Does that make sense? Right? Because I mean, okay, so I mean, we've seen people present with animals before. We've seen somebody be engaging and just have a really smooth, you know, and just sort of really thought out presentation, and just be that person who really can, you know, he's a very good presenter. So I don't think there was anything truly innovative, except that, you know, he figured out along the way in his career that, you know, he just happens to be a naturalist, a biologist, you know, a professor of forestry and those kinds of things. And so he took what his expertise were, and he brought that in as props, as ways to, you know, make it a little more lively. And we saw excellence. You know what I mean? We saw excellence, and everybody was just like, wow, you know, it was, and here's the funny thing, you know, it just went that much above, you know, it wasn't like, oh my God, he's like miles and miles above, but it was just like that much more, where it was really thought out and put together. You know, so that's how I would characterize it, which is exciting.
Yeah.
I love how many people we've had ask to like replay his video at their school. I think that's really cool. Like for, you know, for in-service days with other professors and stuff like that. That's super cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody wants to inquire about how to have Nick or the recording for their class, for your school, just let us know. Be happy to make that happen.
So our, you know, our second presenter.
And maybe there's a word there of, maybe the best way we can do is just to get a better presenter to help. As he did with the animals.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder if what if we have every presenter is required to have a prop, you know?
Okay.
Who knows?
Well, I think speaking of Michael, which was our second speaker, he in a very short time he added a couple of pictures of his pets and his daughters.
Yeah, it's true. But also, I think we witnessed with Michael as well, you know, some real presentation excellence. You know, like he came with a really, really full thought. There was never a moment during the presentation when you kind of thought, I'm not sure if this is really, you know, where this is going or like that. Like he just, you know, it was very well organized and well thought out, and it had a great flow to it. The only thing that we had to do is we had to save some time for Q&A at the end, because he's just, you know, he had this really, really meaty value add presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he has a very compelling camera presence, like, you know, and he masters many domains, which is interesting because, I mean, he spoke about accessibility and he's kind of our go-to accessibility in-house expert, but he's actually a support specialist. And then he is a TikTok personality, which
I think that's great. Yeah, I love that he's got that going on. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So what would be the lesson here?
Well, I think, the biggest lesson that I walked away from was the quote that he threw down there that, accessibility isn't something that you go back and you try to figure out how to fit into your course. It's something that you have to have. It's a requirement now. You know what I mean? It's a part of your planning process. It's a part of your design process. It's a part of the structure of whatever you're putting together. And so you can't think of it as sort of an add-on. It's now, this is a part of the thing. And it's really the depth and level to which you're going to create it. And those are, using the universal design principles and, pieces like that in our course.
Absolutely. I think it's a good time to let everyone know that next week we're having our big annual celebration at Open LMS, which is Global Accessibility Day 2022. So I don't know how many years the company has been doing that, but Michael is actually sort of the lead speaker here. I was also going to say that he has a very refreshing take. And I totally agree. I think the great lesson here is accessibility must be like by design, like from the inception, whenever you create something digital, or maybe not even digital. And something that I think that struck to me a lot, and I brought it up every time I've been able to, is the of accessibility, which to me it opens a lot of doors, which is basically thinking, yeah, usually accessibility is tied to standard diagnosis, both physical and mental, but by considering accessibility at the onset, you can realize that a lot of these little tweaks or these considerations that you take into account can benefit a whole range of people. But I don't want to jump the gun to the next speaker about neurodiversity, but I think it's embracing the different ways in which we interact with platforms, with content, with other people. I guess it leaves more questions than answers, but I think that's exciting ultimately.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I mean, ultimately that's what I think you were circling back to exactly what I was saying, in that it's really how deep do you want to go, right? I mean, because if we look at the varying levels of accessibility, right? You could be deaf, but you could also be temporarily unable to hear. You could be in a loud place or whatever, or you could have an injury, right, that's going to repair itself, but ultimately right now you're hearing impaired, or there's like there's multiple levels. And so when you're designing for accessibility, you kind of just have to decide how deep are you going to go, right? But I think there's some fairly straightforward common pieces about transcription, about alt text, about descriptions, about good color choices that really take you that, they give you at least that 80% solution, right?
And there's like this couple of toys. Maybe I shouldn't call them
toys.
Right.
Yeah,
accessibility aids. But they're actually cool. Like there's this tool that generates the alt text because it actually uses like AI to try to read what's on an image. So it generates descriptions. So that's very useful accessibility wise, but it's also like fun to play with.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Let's go to our third speaker, who is Jess Corinne of Learnfully. And she spent her time talking about working memory and essentially what that means and how we bring that into our practice and how we think about it, how we work around people who have issues with their working memory, or how we build the working memory muscle within us. And, for my biggest takeaway from Jess, what she's put on the table in the summit, as well as in previous conversations is just getting intentional and conscious about your memory processes, right? So essentially it's being mindful of, hey, how do I learn? And how do I remember things? Rather than sort of saying, hey, here's my shopping list and I'm going to go to the store and then hope I remember it. Like, do you have an actual strategy for saying, okay, here's a list and here's I'm going to visualize it and here's I'm going, maybe I have a mnemonic device or like whatever. You do that in learning, and you can. It's a teachable thing, to our learners.
Yeah, I think I don't mean to sound like too dramatic, and I think she was kind of playing with the drama of there is like this crisis, quote unquote, of not understanding enough how the brain works when it comes to learning. And yeah, maybe I'm not sure if we should actually call it a crisis, because there is all this knowledge that we already have of how brains work, how different brains prefer certain things. And the knowledge is out there, but the reality on the classrooms and the online courses and so on just doesn't take that into account. So I think it was a bit of a call to understand how memory works, how it can work very differently from person to person, and how, I mean, there should not be excuse to start like taking them into account in practice, like in things of when do you learn best, for how long do you learn best, how often do you need to repeat a certain topic, how often do you kind of mix it up with other things, and those kinds of things. And yeah, the knowledge is out there. We should be using it.
Yeah. It will set you free, Chris. It will set you free. Who's our first speaker was Ari Sowers. At the end of the day, this presentation was about what do we do in this online universe about ensuring that whatever our learners produce, especially in assessments, is real, right? And it has integrity. And so she presented a bunch of different models and a bunch of different ideas around how do you prepare for that? How do you set it up? What are the, different structures that you can use? And then we had a conversation around, some of the different what ifs, about, I found really fascinating some of the Q&A that we had with her, which was, what do you do about a learner who talks to themselves? Right? Like, cause if you have an online proctoring session that looks like they might be talking with somebody, and that could be an issue. Or what if you have, a learner who always looks down, when they're thinking, because it looks kind of like they're reading something, like just those interesting things. And again, my takeaway for, proctoring, especially in this case, is something that actually Elizabeth Dalton, whose podcast we're going to be publishing here in the next little bit, she says this really, really well. She's just like, look, no matter what data you have and no matter what machines you're using, you still have to look at the human element, right? Like that, if you can never lose that human element, because there's all these factors that we still have that make this a human experience. So that's kind of what I took away. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a common element, and maybe we not only stop mentioning less, but actually more as we approach the EdTech session is the fact that you do need to be aware of a couple of things in order to make technology work for you, because technology has a set of defaults. Like whoever builds the technology, they have like a series of default settings. And when it comes to proctoring, for example, if you set it up all on default, it would probably mean that the system is going to track everything and is going to flag everything, because that's the default. So if you move a little bit, if you bring a screen, or all the things that you mentioned, if we are not conscious about what actually happens in a classroom, in an assessment, so to speak, you might end up letting the technology make all of these decisions, which could be dangerous.
Yeah, disastrous. Yeah, exactly.
Well, the takeaway for our course building is something that I've been wondering about. How would evaluate the work of the course takers, considering the fact that we are not subject matter experts, but we want to build a course that is valuable for people. So I'm wondering, how can we build an assessment experience that maybe it's not even an assessment, but it's like some kind of product that students can contrast with the real world in some extent. Like, for example, I was thinking maybe the outcome of our course of how to win the World Cup is like a plan, but we should find a way which that plan kind of plays out in real life, maybe as the World Cup goes in.
I mean, couldn't they take a team or their favorite team or someone who at least is into the next round and try to be predictive and say, look, here's the elements that they have that could measure up to success, like have that some kind of use that as a reflective assessment moment, and then identify the factors that might be pure luck, right? I mean, injuries, referees that don't see things, the fans going crazy, the heat on one day, because it's going to be in Qatar, like what if on one day, who knows, that's I like the project idea, and I just think that would be a great way, like kind of after looking at these past 5 teams, to say, okay, look, which teams today have maybe some of the success factors, and I'm like thinking in a matrix, right? Like, what are the success factors? Who has them? And see if it's predictive.
Yeah, and I think we're kind of closing into something. It's not quite yet, but yes. And like the plan has all these items of luck, but also, well, the team itself, the strategy, the coach, the money, and I'm not sure what else we've been mentioning, but and as the tournament goes in, you can sort of see what kinds of those items played a role, like maybe on every game, actually.
Indeed.
Could be fun, and it we can sort of help people to say, oh, this plan is complete, maybe it's missing something, or it is well structured, but the ultimate test is how is it going to stack up with the actual event. So I think that could be more interesting.
Nice. Let's go to part 2.
Boom.
Dr. Vanessa Huron. Hers, I think, if we could say, her presentation was the most interactive of all of the presentations that we had, which I thought was really cool. What was I'm trying to remember the name of the technology she used.
Slido,
that's what it was. And I thought that was really actually quite cool. Like, it was seamless. All you needed was one link, and then she was able to ask questions of the audience. They were able to go to this Slido link and type in their answers, and boom, she was able to see the responses from multiple parts of the universe all at once. She was able to share pictures and diagrams and other things. Like, that was really, really sweet. And I find it ironic because she was actually talking about maybe when are the times when you don't necessarily want to use digital tools to create a quality learning experience. And really, that's at the end of the day, that was her entire talk, right? It's like, just sort of there is an emphasis on the shiny new object these days. There's the emphasis on all things digital. I just, you and I were both at an online conference today with Zendesk, and I mean, it couldn't have been more all things digital. Like, literally, that was the message, was digital first, right? Your storefront is digital first. Your interactions are going to be digital first. This and that. It's very interesting. That at least from a business perspective, it's very convenient from a business perspective because it's more efficient, that things will all be digital first. And it's much more profitable for a business that way, right? Because you don't have humans. And yet one of the message here from Dr. Vanessa is maybe you just need to be human. Maybe sometimes you just need to have a conversation. Maybe sometimes, you want to step back.
Yeah, well, when it comes to like the corporate world, it's kind of harsh truth, and it's the fact that companies are like investing engaging experiences for clients or maybe even for employees, uh, as long as it returns something, as long as uh, but
And there's nothing.
it's
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I
no,
mean,
not at all. It's just that we what I do wonder is what kind of, or how do we drive those conversations with the people who are rightfully, in many cases, concerned about, like, if we put all of this technology to mediate the relationships between people, how do we make sure that we're still like reaching out to the human
right.
element?
Mm-hmm.
I think you were mentioning something this morning about, is a community just the sum of transactions between
Mm-hmm.
clients and
Mm-hmm.
companies, or could there be more? And if there is more, is it worthwhile for a company to invest in that additional element that
Right.
lets
Mm-hmm.
people connect, maybe beyond the transaction?
Yeah. Yes. I'm wondering. Yeah. The ultimate. We were having a conversation around. Where does community live, or what is it? And it's really. I think it's really the how do you want to define it, right? That's the critical thing. How broad and wide reaching do you want to define that? But I think that's for another conversation. What can we take from Dr. Vanessa about bringing that into our course?
Um, well, I guess it maybe just like a check for us of wondering if there is like an easier way to do something without a technology, or a simpler technology, so as we don't like get people bogged down with all these different tools and apps that we may end up using.
Right. And we might want to document that. We might want to say, look, we were considering A, B, and C, and we actually decided, to go with either the low tech or the no tech solution. Incidentally, that's one of the other things that I thought was really interesting from the Zendesk conference today was the emphasis that by 2030, everything will be no code or low code. I thought that was an interesting perspective, right? An interesting thing where the justification behind it was there's already such a dearth of technologists that they can't find, that they're basically looking for new solutions. So it's like, look, let's stop looking for people who can do the tech, and let's actually just give them tools so that people who don't want to be programmers can actually do the work. I think that's really interesting. Anyway, I think that will be an interesting thing to see how that affects the education world, right? We can already see it in the H5P stuff and whatnot, where it's just, click, drag, boom, and you're building something really quickly.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I'm this close to jump into the no code train for my work. And
you already are.
because,
You already are, man. You have been forever in the LMS Pulse site and whatnot. I mean, that's all no code stuff, right?
and scripts here and there. But well, maybe just take a better advantage of those tools, or maybe like design the processes that we use, like the funnels, for example, in a more logical way. And to, I don't think I have a very good experience at the time of plugging all those different blocks that we use. So I don't know if it's just a matter of personal skills, or maybe there are better tools that are more readily easy to plug and play. But yeah, I guess I'm on that train already.
Yeah, exactly. Who's after Dr. Vanessa? It was Dr. Thomas. Well, maybe I'm not sure if he's Thomas, if he's Doctor. So Thomas Corner, he presented his vision for what learning will be like in 2040. I'm here to tell you no code, but I thought he had a real emphasis on the automation, the automated universe, right? Like he kind of took us through a journey that was, took a fictitious student and what her experience might be like in 2040. And a lot of that had to do with, interacting with bots and interacting with different, how does she interact with the school and with materials and those kinds of things. So, what I'm trying to think about what we would take away from his talk to put into our course, because ultimately 2040 is a ways away.
Yeah, it's nearer than you think.
It's nearer than you think, but I mean, like, will I be around in 2040? I hope so. I guess so. Yeah.
Maybe just your head in a bat.
I guess it's not that far away. It's only what? It's 17 years away. Is that right? 18 years away?
Yeah.
So everybody, you can date yourself now. Where will you be in 18 years? Yikes.
18.
But I thought, his presentation started out with a really great graphic. I don't know if you remember it, but he put on the screen a mobile phone with a camera, like one of the first ones. And his follow-up to that was, he was basically saying, like, you can't predict what this technology, nobody could predict what this technology and how it would transform the universe, right? Cameras on phones and these kinds of things. But he also pointed out that we are further away from that picture than we are to 2040, right? So it's actually that long ago. And so what will happen, what will transpire in the next 17 years is fairly intense.
Yeah, and it's like as an economist, there is this concept called induced demand, and it's basically like the cameras are the perfect example. Like nobody thought like everyone would take even the slightest liking to just take a picture and just play with that, and now everyone has one or several just because it's there and it's just readily available. So it's a good question. There is no good answers from my field, at least, to answer what's going to be readily available. Then everyone's going to just use it casually for fun, much less in e-learning, in education. Because I mean, we may be seeing the beginning of things, but the thing is that so many things are starting or have been with us that you never know which one is going to explode.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's interesting, and well, I could not help.
If we did know, then we'd all be billionaires, my friend. That's if we all had that kind of insight. Anyway, we'd write a book.
Yeah. And we cannot invest in Moodle because it's open source. I also wanted to say that compared to the other session Thomas did speak a lot about interoperability, which I think it's very closely related to the no code. But I think it's fair to say that the philosophy of Moodle is open, but Moodle wants to remain at the core of the experience. Like if you want to plug any other tools, you want it to plug into the Moodle, which is the center of the experience. And I think it would be worth at least seeing, are we going to need like a center, like a hub for all the other tools that we plug, or is it going to be more like a network of things where you don't really see a center, but everything depends on one another, and there's no way to centralize the data, the experience, and so on.
Exactly. Who was our what is it now? Seventh speaker?
David Bruce.
Yeah.
Mr.
Porter, Dr. Porter. So he actually, again, came really, really prepared, and he had a multi-layered view of how micro-credentials can play a role in the higher education universe. And he used his institution as an example. And I loved how he went from sort of the grand regulatory framework to, what are the needs of the institution, to what are the needs of the class, and then the needs of the student. And I thought that was a really brilliant way to kind of approach it. And I think he left us with more questions than answers, for sure. But he definitely presented us with a lot of tools to get to the answers for ourselves, in terms of, like the Australian government has sort of a regulatory handbook
Framework?
on how do you use micro credentials and what does it mean. I asked him some questions about connecting with these companies, these corporations, and what does that conversation look like, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this particular presentation is very much worthwhile revisiting, in terms of the resources he puts on the table, and then also the questions that he asks in order to help you take your next step, or maybe help us take our next step in right? Like in putting micro credentials into your course.
Yeah. Well, I remember we talked a little bit whether like the micro trend in e-learning is going to be like the default experience, or is it just going to be an increasingly useful, reliable tool to create experiences? And I think that debate is still really interesting to see play out. I do want to ask you, like, how micro is our course going to be in a way? But before that, the other thing I think it's really important is that it makes things feel easier from a regulatory compliant, and that's always like a headache or a struggle, trying to deal with if you want to have like a new kind of credentialing or course or teaching that kind of differs considerably from what universities, what government or regulatory agencies are used to in terms of how a course goes and so on. I think part of the message is that those agencies are increasingly more open-minded because they are aware of the many ways in which business as usual is not working. And of course, it depends. I would say Australia would be more like forward thinking than, say, many places in Latin America.
Sure.
But overall, as new generations take over those positions, we might be seeing like more openness to micro and all these new approaches and technologies. So that makes me hopeful.
Fantastic. I love it. Let's move on to our last speaker of part 2. We'll save part 3 for next time, because we're already approaching 40 minutes for our office hours here. Kevin Kelly, who was our keynote speaker, again, a really clear, thought out and thoughtful presentation around creating equity in a digital learning environment. He's written a book around this with the same title. And I really appreciate his interactive, presentation style, and also just sort of, again, it's one of those things like the initial or the first thing that pops into my head about his presentation were just some of the very, very simple things that we've all discovered and we all know, but he brings into the sort of contrast or stark reality, like talking about how often do you call on somebody in class, or who gets called on most often. And the reality is the data shows that it's usually names that are, Caucasian men get called on the most. So that, just like, hey, let's call a spade a spade. All right. This is what happens. We know what happens. And so, he's like, look, do yourself a favor, just create a deck of cards with everybody's name on it in the class, and then literally shuffle them up before class, and then just like take the one off the top, and you guarantee yourself equity in interacting with your students that way. And it's just such a simple thing, but can have profound effect, right? And he had multiple levels of examples of how to use these types of tools. What did you think?
Yeah, equity is always, I won't say tricky, but it does require you to be like aware of a couple of things, like the reality of a given student, and it's the complication comes when maybe you have something, the student has like a particular physical trait, and you kind of tend to treat them as if they deserve equity, when in reality that may not be the case.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe equity doesn't have to do with giving like a minority like more opportunities, like to speak on a classroom or something like that, but more of making sure that everyone is getting what they are expecting, which talks a bit about personalization.
Right.
And the other angle there, I think, is the data, because how do you have like a better range of data, more qualitative maybe, but one data that doesn't that or that doesn't play out with these concerns or the assumptions of profiling, which is, I think it's a complicated data debate. How do you capture the the reality, the circumstances of a given student, without falling into this trap of, or like maybe it's an unfounded fear of having data that someone could use that for malicious purposes. So then we also talk about privacy and cybersecurity,
which I hope we will have deep conversations at our EdTech session about those.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to those, really.
Yeah, excellent. Is what again? So, sort of final question. Then, what is there anything from Kelly, Kevin's conversation or Kevin's presentation that we want to make sure that we put into our course?
I would say that whatever activities, we should make sure that whoever wants to join us can do it. Like whether that means allowing for a different, like a broad variety of formats, maybe, or activities or ways to join that allow people from different circumstances. I think he was talking about this experience of he was teaching like a course about mobile learning, but he didn't realize until later that there were some students who were actually taking this course on mobile because they didn't have any more Wi-Fi, because they lived on a car on the parking lot of the campus.
Yeah, his example was that he provided a resource that was, a downloadable PDF, or it was actually pretty chunky, and he didn't realize that some of his students had a hard time accessing the resource because exactly that. They were either, not in a stable home situation, or they were actually accessing the course. I think the classic one now is, outside of Starbucks or outside of McDonald's or something that has a Wi-Fi connection that they actually connect to. And so he, it was kind of an embarrassing moment for him where he's like, wow, I made these assumptions. And so he then obviously worked with those students to do something, but it's kind of cool. Man.
I just watched this new Marvel movie from Doctor Strange.
Okay.
So there is this scene where they jump like from universe to universe. And I think that kind of related when it comes to equity, because the girl that sort of guides Doctor Strange tells him, number one rule of jumping a new universe is assume you don't know anything.
Exactly. Assume nothing.
I think it's like in equity is assume nothing about how each person can access, and just let them tell you what they need to succeed at your course. So I think that's something that is achievable, and I would feel proud of ourselves if we let people let us know what they need in order to access our course and succeed.
On that note, that's a great way to tie it in a bow, my friend. I like that. All right, great. I think that we call it a good for our office hours this week, but next week we're going to take some tangible steps on creating our course on how to win the World Cup. So
yeah, Leave us your questions, your comments on Facebook, subscribe, do all those things that YouTubers tell you to do.
All right, man. Thanks a lot. Ciao.